Mental Health Internationally Delivering Support, or MINDS, is a group of graduate students and young professionals from many places around the world that are passionate about making a difference and supporting each other in academia and beyond. We have partnered with Dragonfly Mental Health to bring this event to you today. We appreciate that wherever you are, you may wish to acknowledge the land and honor Indigenous people who have lived and worked on the land and those who reside on it today. As an organizer affiliated with University of Toronto, Canada, I wish to acknowledge this land on which University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron, Wendat, and the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this place is still the home for many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. We also wish to acknowledge and are grateful for the traditional Indigenous lands that all of you work and live on, no matter where you are joining us from today. Today's exciting event will span across 4 different time zones and bring together many wonderful speakers to discuss a variety of topics, such as mental health literacy, imposter syndrome, diversity in academia, and many more. We will have workshops, panels, roundtables, and discussions. Thank you to our wonderful session chairs, moderators, speakers, our organizing team and their team leads, and all of the people who volunteered to organize this event. Your cumulative efforts made this vision in a reality, and I'm so grateful for your contributions. I would like to especially thank the University of Toronto Global and the Student Engagement Award for funding that allowed to pursue this project. Most sincerely, we would like to thank Dragonfly Mental Health, who helped spearhead the conference, offered the expertise, and are continuing to contribute their time by running workshops for each of the time zone during 24-hour event. Please don't forget that you can support Dragonfly Mental Health through donations on their website. We also would like to thank our partners, and I'm PhD Balance, Voices of Academia, as well as Center for Innovation in Campus Mental Health and IMS International that have helped with promotion of this event. This project was initiated by a team of co-founders, Alison G., Alal Safin, Aleksandra Malinovsky, and Aleksandra Marakhovskaia. This initiative came from conversations we had as friends around how we can support our peers and other academics in their programs and careers. Our vision is to build a global community for people to come together and support each other and share their stories and ideas. I would like to acknowledge my incredible teammates for continuous effort, dedication for this event to come alive. Thank you so much for your contributions and support, and teaching me a great lesson of how rewarding teamwork can be. We hope you enjoy the event, connect with people from various places, learn something new today, and we're looking forward to seeing you in the different sessions. Thank you, and now we'll pass the word to our first session chair, Emily.
Hi, everyone. So if you're just joining us, I'm Emily, and that was Sasha, one of the organisers on the committee for this conference, and she'll also be chairing the discussion for the Australian session today at 1 o'clock. We also have Ala, who will be moderating the panel that we have at 10:20. And I'll be chairing the workshop and also the roundtable sessions later on. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute. And yeah, on behalf of the organising committee and Dragonfly Mental Health, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for joining this Australian block of the MINDS conference. I have no idea where you're coming in from. There might be some international people in the audience today. I'm in Melbourne, so we really appreciate you logging on today. If you're, if it's a bit of an odd time for you, I fully acknowledge that that could be happening. So thank you for joining. And yeah, this is my first international virtual conference. So if it's yours too, you're not alone. And I'm low-key sitting on my floor so that you have a good light for me. So also, if you're in your home office or your bedroom or wherever it is that you're coming in from today, we acknowledge, these are very strange times, and we really appreciate that you've decided to engage with this particular conference today. I really want to thank the organising committee. I really can't take any credit at all for helping with the organisation of this conference. My role is really mainly today as a facilitator for the Australian block. And I'm just so impressed by how this conference has come together. And I hope you will be too. There's a lot that's going on behind the scenes to bring, light to such an important topic that a lot of us have to deal with day to day within academia. So absolutely none of this would have been possible without the organising team, which consists of over 30 different members, and also support from our partner, Dragonfly Mental Health. So don't forget that you can support Dragonfly Mental Health through donations on their website. And I just want to reiterate what Sasha said earlier, just a special thanks to some of the partners that have joined with the conference today, which include PhD Balance, Voices of Academia, Cactus Foundation, Centre for Innovation in Campus Mental Health, Convergent Science Network, and IMS International. And they've spread the word about this really great initiative that the organising committee has organised. So if you're looking for a little bit of a very quick backstory on me, I am involved with the Voices of Academia, which is kind of really started on Twitter, co-founded by Dr. Zoe Ayres and Dr. Marissa Kate, to help to build a supportive network of, academics around the world by sharing initially blog stories about different experiences. And that's now expanded to a podcast as well. So I'm the host of the podcast. And I've become involved with that and some mental health advocacy because of my own personal experience with mental illness that's impacted my academic journey. So I'm in Melbourne today, so I would like to share this slide. Clearly my first international conference, bear with me. So I acknowledge that, I'm chairing this conference from the Boon Wurrung and the Wurundjeri clans, from the lands that they are the custodians of, and I pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. And as Sasha said, wherever you're signing in from today, we acknowledge the traditional owners of those lands and waters as well. So today we have a really exciting agenda for the Australian block. We have the workshop coming up first from Dragonfly Mental Health on mental health literacy. We have a panel about a diversity of experiences within academia. So there'll be 3 panelists speaking on that. We've got a bit of a lunch break, and then we have a roundtable session this afternoon talking about how to build a good student supervisor relationship and how to maintain that. And then we'll move on to a discussion group where Cactus Initiative will talk about some of the academic stress triggers that they've determined from a global survey on mental health among researchers. We'll then have some concluding remarks from Sasha, and then she'll pass it on to the next time zone block. So I'm going to move on to sort of introducing the next session. We have Dr. Wendy Ingram here from Dragonfly Mental Health that's going to be facilitating this session. She's waving to everyone now. And I have a little bit of housekeeping before I sort of introduce Wendy and hand the floor over to her. So for this session today, feel free to turn your video on. As I mentioned, I'm on the floor, so we don't really mind where you're coming in from if you'd like to turn your camera on and sort of engage with us, but please keep your microphone muted. You can turn on or off closed captioning. So that has been enabled at this point. And you can do that by moving your mouse over the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and either hiding or showing subtitles. We are recording and streaming these sessions, and we'll stop that for the last part to be unrecorded for Q&A sessions. So if you would like your questions to be anonymous, there's the opportunity for that. And you can either raise your hand so that either Sasha or I can unmute you to ask your question real time, or you can also send it through Slido if you're coming through on YouTube today, or you can send it through the Zoom chat as well. So we'll stop the recording after Wendy has finished her talk for the Q&A for this particular session. We also want to provide a trigger warning, as there are some sensitive subjects that may be discussed. If any of the topics are triggering or upsetting for you, we encourage you to step away and come back as needed. And we want you to know that this is a supportive environment. So I'll, every now and again, I can put some of those links into the chat if you would like to access those. Now, that being said, we aren't healthcare professionals and we're not qualified to provide counselling or therapy. So if you'd like to visit our website at mindsinacademia.com/resources, you can refer to a whole host of collected resources that can provide support all around the world. Please remain respectful of others. Inappropriate behaviour or comments won't be tolerated, and they might result in your removal from the conference. If you need any help during the session, please contact IT, either through the Zoom chat or by emailing minds.conference@gmail.com. And yeah, you can enter your questions in the chat at the end and I'll read them out, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask your question directly. So I'm going to stop sharing now so that I can introduce our first speaker. If I can. All right. Yeah, so obviously you know by now that I'm the chair of this session. So I really want to thank Wendy for facilitating this session, and also to you, the audience. If you've been coming in along the way as we've been introducing the Australian block, I welcome you and really want to thank you for your attendance and your participation. I will need to duck out early from this session because I'm speaking on the panel. So Sasha will take over any questions and concluding this particular session when I need to duck out. But yeah, I want to welcome Dr. Wendy Ingram. She's the co-founder and CEO of Dragonfly Mental Health, which is a nonprofit dedicated to cultivating excellent mental health among academics worldwide. She's also a research scientist at Geisinger Health, and she's working on biomedical informatics projects aimed at improving mental health care outcomes. So I'm really looking forward to this talk, and I hope you are too. I'll thank Wendy and turn the virtual stage over to you.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I do want to, thank all the amazing organizers that put this together. I remember hearing about it just as a kernel of an idea many months ago, and for it to have come together so quickly and so efficiently, and seeing all these amazing people from all over the world. It's really a joy and an honor to be here. And I'm super stoked to be the first person to kick it off too. So, let's begin at the beginning. And so my workshop today really is an introduction to mental health literacy, and something that every academic can and should understand in order to better understand themselves as well as the people around them. And we're putting all of this into the context of academia. So I hope you all enjoy it. I'm going to pull up my slides and get things going. Let's see if that did the right thing. Good. Yes, fabulous. I love that thumbs up. All right, so let's just kick it off. I'm going to repeat you can go to the website for the Minds Conference to find resources, but we are going to be talking about suicide, about various mental health conditions, and during the Q&A, people can bring up various questions. So please just be warned that there may be some sensitive topics. If at any point you are uncomfortable or feel like you could use some support, you can also find local 24/7 hotlines for wherever you are in the world. You can go to this website, www.iaspinfo.com. /resources/crisis_centers. And so that you can look it up by region, by country, where you're at, and find something that you can help that can help you right away. Dragonfly, like the Minds Conference organizers, is not a healthcare provider. So the information that we're providing today does not qualify as medical advice and does not substitute for speaking to medical professionals. However, everything that we're going to talk about and be pointing out today is evidence-based. We research everything that we present and goes into our presentations. So the talk outline is, I'll give a little bit more personal and Dragonfly mental health introduction. I'll briefly set the tone for what this talk is meant to be and what it's not. And then I'll introduce the mental health spectrum. And the reason for that is that, we often end up talking about just wellness or maybe crisis only. And very infrequently do we talk about the entire spectrum. So I will introduce the entire spectrum, but then we're going to focus in for the bulk of the mental health literacy talk on mental illnesses. We're going to talk about causes and treatments, and again, just scratching the surface, but we're going to touch on mood disorders and anxiety, burnout, psychosis, substance abuse, obsessive compulsive disorder, and ADHD. We can't talk about every single thing, but we will also talk about the borderlands or intersectionality and belonging to different traditionally, historically excluded groups from science and from research, and the effects of that on mental health. And then we'll hopefully have plenty of time for a group discussion. And, it can be Q&A. I do know a lot of things, as I'll talk about in my introduction, but and I'm happy to answer any and all questions, but this really should be a community conversation. I would love for it to go that way. So please don't be shy when we say it's time for you to unmute and ask your questions or bring up topics that you'd like to discuss. So my name is Dr. Wendy Ingram, and I received my PhD in molecular and cell biology from UC Berkeley back in 2015. I got started in basic biochemistry research when I was an undergrad, and then for my postdoc, I studied psychiatric epidemiology at Johns Hopkins. So I've literally been studying the brain and behavior from molecules to populations, and it's really a huge passion of mine. But simultaneously to being an academic and training as an academic, I got involved in academic mental health advocacy. And this really came from a number of personal tragedies. I won't go into it right now for this talk, but I helped create peer-led grassroots organizations at Johns Hopkins University as a postdoc and UC Berkeley as a graduate student. And now, those grassroots efforts were great for that local community, but we can do so much more. And so that's what really motivated me to join with co-founders from all over the world to create Dragonfly Mental Health. So Dragonfly Mental Health we work to improve knowledge, address culture directly, and build community. And no one knows academics like an academic. And so we wanted all of our solutions to be evidence-based and delivered by the people that we trust, other academics. And so we have a global consortium for academic mental health. This is a huge group of researchers and volunteers from all over the world that work together to conduct research and address systemic issues. We've been building a global community throughout the world that is competent and confident and compassionate around mental health and academia through Dragonfly cafes. And we also have on-campus programs. So we deliver talks like this for conferences, but we also deliver them direct to communities at universities worldwide. So please feel free to get in touch with us. We believe that the best way to cultivate excellent mental health is a fully preventative and prepared community. And so there are 5 domains of excellence that we've identified, and you can read more about on our website, but they involve departmental committees, peer networks, mental health literacy, like we're doing today, fighting stigma, like you'll be doing in some of the later sessions, and skills workshops. And so these 5 things combined will create a preventative and environment that really helps a lot of people before they get into serious trouble. So I do want to acknowledge that Dragonfly is a huge global organization. We now have 250 volunteers from over 30 different countries, representing a whole myriad of backgrounds and disciplines. And so it's a phenomenal group of people, and I would welcome anyone interested to come join us and check out our website. So now to the talk. What this talk is meant to be is a brief mental health introduction. We're only going to have time to touch on a few of the most relevant mental health conditions, and it's meant to be the beginning of an ongoing conversation about mental health literacy and culture change within academia. It's not going to be a comprehensive knowledge and response training. We do offer skills training and response trainings, but this is not it. And it's definitely not everything you need to know in a nutshell. So thank you for coming with open minds and open hearts. And, I hope everyone takes something away from this talk. So now let's touch on the mental health spectrum. So mental health is on the mental health spectrum. Mentally healthy individuals or states, people that are in that state, are doing well. They are reacting to every day, every moment with really no particular problems. But inherent to life is something on the mental health spectrum called stress. So there are expected and unexpected stressors that pop up in our lives regularly, either big stressors or little stressors, but things that fit into the stress category are things where we can get into a stressed state and then go back to that mentally healthy state pretty easily with just basic, easy, a little bit of time, or as the stressor passes, back into the mentally healthy state. The next state on the mental health spectrum, I'll point out, is distress. And so this is not clinically diagnosable disease yet, which is the next state on the spectrum, but it is a state that is more than just stress, is more than something, and it takes a little bit more to go from that distressed state back to that mentally healthy state. And so what we get when we're talking about mental disease on the mental health spectrum is something that's diagnosable by a clinician and almost certainly requires some kind of intervention and would certainly benefit from clinical intervention, clinical care, psychological or psychiatric care. And so disease states are when you actually meet criteria for a given disease. Crisis is at the far end of the mental health spectrum. And unfortunately in academia and a lot of different situations, we really tend to allow ourselves to get all the way to a crisis state before seeking care, which is really unfortunate. And I'll mention why a little bit later. But what we want to do is focus today on the disease state. Crisis states are ones that require immediate intervention, and the person either cannot or should not be left alone and needs help in order to get connected to the resources that they need immediately. So today we're going to focus on diseases, and all of these things are important. And I do want to emphasize that people can have a disease, meet criteria for a chronic mental illness, say chronic depression, major depressive disorder, and they can still experience life in a mentally healthy state the vast majority of the time when they have proper treatment and proper intervention. So just because you've experienced a disease or have a chronic mental illness does not mean that you cannot be in a mentally healthy state. So with that, what actually makes it a disease? There are, in fact, rules and things. There's not a blood test for most of these things, but for mental illnesses, there's 3 criteria. The first one is Symptoms have to be consistent, but not necessarily constant, for more than a reasonable amount of time. And so for some illnesses like depression or anxiety, that reasonable amount of time is defined as 2 weeks or longer. And often it's a lot longer than that people will deal with these symptoms, sometimes months or even years. So these things don't necessarily mean it, just minimum 2 weeks for certain illnesses, minimum a little bit longer, say 6 months for something like post-traumatic stress disorder. The second big piece here is that these must represent a significant change in the person's normal experience upon onset. So irritability is a symptom that can be a symptom of depression. And it's something that if somebody is just an irritable, cranky person and that's their personality, that's not necessarily a change in their personality. But if we do see a change in someone's personality, that's one of the criteria that makes it a disease. And then the third piece is really, truly the most important part, is that the social, occupational, educational, and other important functioning must be negatively impacted by these changes. So I do want to emphasize, before I get into any of the nitty-gritty detail and go into the weeds with you, that all mental diseases are real, biologically and environmentally driven illnesses, like any other physical illness that you're aware of. And the illnesses can be episodic, they can be chronic, or they can be singular events. The vast majority of them are preventable and are highly treatable. That's one of the take-home messages I want everybody to leave here with. And then I also want to emphasize something that we at Dragonfly really care deeply about, which is that what the literature has shown is that it's critical to a mentally healthy climate and culture to not only have access to mental health care, but also have a community that supports the person seeking care, staying in care. And that's what really leads to a mentally healthy community. So on to the diseases. The mood disorders and anxiety, I put them together because they tend to run together. So mood disorders are depression and bipolar disorder or bipolar depression. And anxiety is very, very highly comorbid with these depressive and mood disorders, but they can't exist alone. You can have a panic disorder and an anxiety disorder by itself, no signs of depression, or don't meet criteria for depression. So if you were to generally go to the general public and look at and interview a whole bunch of people with rigorous validated scales, you would find that approximately 6.7% of people would meet criteria for depression or bipolar disorder at any given time, and about 6% would meet criteria for anxiety at any given time. The lifetime prevalence of depression is 16% though. So that means 16% at least people in the world will experience at least one clinically significant depressive episode. So why do we care so much about this, other than the fact that these are the most common illnesses of the mental illnesses? It's because they're 6 to 8 times higher among graduate students. This was found in a 2018 pretty large survey of international graduate students from North America and Europe. And 39% of students who responded to validated instruments indicated that they met criteria for moderately severe to severe depression, and 41% met criteria for severe anxiety. And one of the reasons why we focus so much on mood disorders and anxiety is that mood disorders underlie 80 to 90% of suicides. Untreated or insufficiently treated mood disorders are responsible for the vast majority of suicides. And so by treating the underlying mood disorder is actually the most effective way to prevent suicide. So that is why we focus so heavily at Dragonfly on mental health literacy. So another 2 things that are really important if you or someone you know happens to be acutely suicidal is restricting access to lethal means. Don't leave that person alone, and to avoid substance use. Substance use can increase impulsivity and increase the likelihood that someone will take action that cannot be untaken. And so the symptoms of mood disorders and anxiety, we have an entire 1-hour seminar just on depression. So we're touching just barely on these things, but it involves more than just the mood. It's the mood, it's the body and the behavior, and it affects thoughts as well. So it creates thought disorders, which suicidal ideation really can be attributed to as a thought disorder, really. And the causes are myriad. There's actually so many different ways, biologically, physically, and experientially, that you can arrive at a depressed or anxiety state. And so it can be through immune and endocrine dysfunction, through nutrition, sleep, or exercise deficiency, and obviously through the things that we've heard about through the drugs that they use involve serotonin. So the serotonergic pathways are known to be involved. There's genetic predisposition, and very, very large influence here is trauma. And so I do want to emphasize that just experiencing a mood disorder of some sort, such as bipolar disorder, which is quite a serious mental illness, doesn't mean that you're not cut out for academia. And I want to highlight one person in particular. Professor Kay Redfield Jamison at Johns Hopkins is the world's expert on bipolar disorder and has bipolar disorder herself. She wrote a memoir called An Unquiet Mind. It is phenomenal. So really an incredible way to learn more about this illness and gain confidence that it does not spell the end of your career if you happen to have one of these things. So related to depression, but different, is burnout. So burnout is work related, and the symptoms include emotional exhaustion or physical exhaustion, reduced resilience and adaptability, cynicism about work and colleagues, and reduced performance and concentration. And so this is a little different than depression. Some of it copies over, but we know now from the literature that burnout really comes from stress and comes from very specific causes, such as chronic stress relating to work or other ongoing activities, lack of control, bullying or toxic work environments and relationships, and this, unfortunately catch-all phrase, work-life imbalance. So what does that mean? We're not going to get into that today. But what is great about all of these things, and what I'm going to emphasize on every single disease, is the things that help. They are treatable. So taking breaks or vacation, huge help to burnout. Negotiating better hours, accommodations, or communication at work. Seeking support and building better relationships at work. Creating a peer network. Mindfulness, sleep, and exercise. And so what you don't see on here is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. You don't see psychotherapy. So if these things don't work, then it's probably not burnout. It might be depression. So it's time for you to talk to a mental health professional, somebody who can help you get connected to the right resources. So psychosis is a really interesting one that I like to bring up because it's pretty rare. It's only about 1% of the population that'll meet criteria for a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia. However, it's one of the most disturbing things to experience oneself, and it can be very frightening for the people around them as well. And people might not know what to do. So I would like to demystify it and just bring it to the front and let everybody know the symptoms are disconnected from reality, bizarre behavior and delusions, hallucinations, which most people associate with psychosis, but hallucinations can be auditory, they can be visual, they can even be touch as well. So there's different kinds of hallucinations that people can experience. And it can be very frightening to have these kinds of hallucinations and be locked in that state for some period of time. And one of the most pointed things that you can notice about someone or yourself is chaotic or incoherent speech or writing. And so the causes we know for schizophrenia, for example, is that it's about 50-50 genetic versus environmental triggers. So twin studies have shown us it's about 50% genetic, 50% environmental. But psychosis is something that any brain can do, depending on the circumstances. So extreme sleep disturbance, and it can also be caused by substance use or withdrawal. And so these can also accompany other disorders like bipolar mania or borderline personality disorder. But these aren't called psychotic, these are called psychotic features, not a psychotic illness or disease itself. So what helps and what's amazing and really important to know is that antipsychotics, psychodynamic therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy are all phenomenal treatments for these things. So I'll also emphasize that psychosis is not even the end of a career. It really isn't when somebody gets into the proper care and finds the things that work for them. And so Professor Ellen Sachs is a fantastic law professor in Southern California and wrote a memoir called The Center Cannot Hold. Highly recommend it, really amazing work, and she is a truly phenomenal academic. So substance use disorder. Symptoms are daily use, binge behavior, blackouts, lying about your use or your cravings or use impacting your work, your relationships, your friendships, and possibly causing mental and or physical health problems. So all of those are the symptoms that it's not just substance use, it's a substance use disorder. And the causes, this is something that's really important because substance use disorder is unfortunately very, very stigmatized. A lot of people find it, still believe that it's a moral failing or it's a self-control issue when it is recognized internationally as a mental illness. And we now know that about 40 to 60% of the risk comes from your genetics. And so it can come on because of access, and people will start using substances as a coping behavior or refer to it as self-medication, but it really truly is not. If you're self-medicating with a substance and experiencing any of these symptoms listed above, this is really it's going to probably make your condition worse. Unfortunately. And so what's really tough is that social pressure, easy access leads to dependence, and it's highly, highly linked with other mental diseases. Again, the great news is that there are things that help that tremendously. And so detoxification programs, support groups to maintain sobriety, individual or group counseling, and peer support is really, really, really helpful for anyone with a substance use disorder. And so another critical piece with substance use, though, is sometimes in the literature, though, or online, you'll look it up and they'll call it dual diagnosis. This is referring to someone who has a substance use disorder and a mental illness of some sort, or multiple mental illnesses. Like I said, depression and anxiety co-occur. So if you've got alcohol use disorder on top of that, you've got 3 things going on. So it's not just dual diagnosis, but treating the co-occurring mental health disorders at the same time is usually very critical for the full recovery of the individual. So obsessive compulsive disorder, we're going to talk about next. And the symptoms are strong urge to perform certain routines or rituals. This is a compulsion, unwanted repetitive thoughts or intrusive fears, obsession. And what happens with folks with OCD is that they'll spend up to hours a day performing physical or mental rituals. And this can really lead to a lot of interference in that third category. It'll cause problems for their work, their relationships, or their family life. And so if they're avoiding triggers or people in order to avoid having people notice that they're doing these compulsions, then that can be really damaging to the individual. But the causes we now know involve a number of similar things to some of the other ones. Genetics, trauma can be a big thing. Brain and structural differences now have even been identified in some cohorts. So OCD or OCD, subset of OCD symptoms and cases may be due to developmental issues, with the brain structures developing a little bit different in these individuals. So why do we talk about OCD? It's only in 1% of the total population worldwide. But the reason why we include this in these, this mental health literacy sampling is that in a number of cases and studies, we've found that especially in the STEM fields, people who meet criteria for OCD may be even 3 to 3.5 times more likely, more common in academics. So you might run into more people who are experiencing these things than your general day-to-day life. So what helps? Cognitive behavioral therapy is really, really effective. Exposure and response prevention is something that people also use. And there are certain SSRIs, not all of them, but some of them that work really, really well in controlling OCD symptoms. So there's another academic, Dr. Nadine Muller. Her website is right there, and she talks openly about being someone who lives with OCD and is an academic. So you can check her out if you're interested in that. So the final disease that we're going to talk about is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So there are 3 subtypes. There's hyperactive, there's inattentive, and there's combined. And the symptoms are, actually, this one's a little unique because it does require that the symptoms must have been present since childhood. So there's a fair number of people, especially women, especially high intelligence women, who get diagnosed much, much later in life. But in the diagnosis process, they will go on a retrospective evaluation of childhood behavior and identify that these symptoms were also there then. They just may have been masked. And so the symptoms are difficulty focusing, especially on people speaking or if it's boring, easily distracted, misplacing things, being hyper focused and perseverance. So that's continuing on a task even when you don't really want to be doing it still, or it's inappropriate to still be doing it. Trouble acting even when the intention is there, trouble managing time, and restlessness or fidgetiness. And the causes here are really well known now to be about 75% heritable. But it does seem to be highly polygenic. There's not one gene that causes ADHD. So it does make it a more complicated illness. And it also involves some environmental factors as well. So what helps? There are stimulant and non-stimulant medications. Environmental supports are really, really helpful. So engaging with people and clinicians who know ADHD really well can help problem solve and create environmental supports that help support that person. Skills training is really helpful, and psychotherapy to support living with the condition is also very good. This may reduce the frustration and a lot of negative self-talk that a lot of people with ADHD develop. And so I do want to emphasize that only about 30 to 50% of children outgrow ADHD. So from 6% of children that meet criteria, there's still going to be in an adult population about 2.5% that meet criteria for this disorder. So the things I want to highlight here at the end is mental disease is highly treatable. I said this throughout, but it's worth repeating. And one thing to emphasize, 80% of major depressive episodes respond to standard treatment. And this is coming from the American Psychological Association. We know that awareness by attending a talk like this, early identification and early treatment are key. So unfortunately, the studies show us that the average person waits 6 to 8 years to seek treatment for depression. And this is just so tragic because untreated mental illnesses lead to other comorbid disorders, which complicate the recovery and delay treatment response. So again, what we've said before is community support and encouragement is hugely, hugely impactful for seeking care and sustained treatment engagement and ultimately recovery. So I mentioned earlier, graduate students have 8 times higher rates of severe depression and anxiety, and those with higher IQ and an education report higher rates of mood disorders but are less likely to seek treatment. And this is really problematic, especially when you layer on top of the things that all academics are experiencing, the extreme stresses, the chronic deadlines that never seem to go away, the required repetitive failing that we have to do by engaging in things that have never been found out before. It's amazing, it's exciting, but it can also be very, very stressful. And that contributes to all of these illnesses getting triggered and or being made worse. And so now add on top of that belonging to a historically marginalized or excluded group, such as women, Black, Indigenous, or people of color, LGBTQ plus individuals, first generation scientists, disability, people with disabilities, or international scientists. All of these identities really can result in a lot of additional stress, what we call minority stress. And it's really unfortunate because remarks that seem harmless, but when repeated daily and in all aspects of life, they do have a cumulative effect. They serve as constant reminders that members of marginalized groups are somehow less than, which they are not, but this is the message that's being received by individuals who belong to some of these groups. And so these are all phrases that I have heard either myself or attributed directly at someone I know in academia. And it's not okay. And what we're talking about here can be called microaggressions. And so microaggressions can cause members of these marginalized groups to feel isolated, invalidated, and even initiate PTSD-like symptoms such as hypervigilance. And this can lead to anxiety and depression as well. And so Kimberly Crenshaw was the one who said, we tend to talk about race inequality as separate from inequality based on gender, class, sexuality, or immigrant status. But some people are subject to all of these. So that's just emphasizing the more than additive effect that belonging to more than one of these groups may have a negative effect on mental health. And we know that that is true from the literature as well. And so what can we actually do? We are a solutions-focused organization here at Dragonfly. And so what you can do is be aware of and question your assumptions that you may have about other people. And if you do notice that you may have harmed someone by saying something that did not land well, then apologizing immediately to that person and going back to questioning your assumptions. Why did you say that? And should you not say that again? So a comparison I like to make and end on is between elite athletes and academics. The best athletes in the world train incredibly hard to achieve peak performance in their field using their bodies. But when there's an injury, even the smallest one, the response is to address it immediately, even courtside, in front of the entire world. The whole world will see them being treated for their illness or their injury. And yet when we're privileged to be able to train our minds at the highest level as scientists and researchers and academics of all sorts. And our mind is the most critical instrument for our work, but when it becomes injured or strained, we tend to just keep doing what we're doing. So we really need to change this. And one of the things that we do at Dragonfly, I mentioned, is we ask questions. We are conducting research. And what we've found is that the vast majority of people say that they will not seek care, even though they know they need it, because of stigma. So we need to break that, because what we do know is that what helps is talking, is therapy, is engaging in mental health care, getting counseling, exercising, finding supportive strategies for yourself and for others. And so with that, I'm going to stop and open this up for questions and answers and hopefully open discussion. And I do want to invite anyone who'd like to join us at dragonflymentalhealth.org. You can sign up for our newsletters. You can indicate that you're interested in becoming a volunteer. You can join us in our Slack space, and get to know amazing people from all over the world who really care about creating a shift in the culture of academia. And another low pressure way to engage with us is to join us at a Dragonfly Cafe sometime. So we currently hold them Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central European time. If this doesn't work for you, email us. Please email me at wendy@dragonflymentalhealth.org and let me know that time doesn't work and you would like another time, and we will set up a cafe that works for this time zone. So with that, I will hand it back over to the facilitators, Emily and Sasha, and see if there are questions that have already been coming on.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And I could probably talk for way too long on how relatable all of that was. We have about another 20 minutes in this session. So that's just to flag how much time we have left. But I just wanted to say, for those that have joined us, throughout this session, this is Dr. Wendy Ingram, speaking on behalf of Dragonfly Mental Health. And they're an organization, as she said, that runs a lot of different workshops and have a variety of different resources to help academics understand, some of what may be impacting them and also how they might be able to address that based on evidence-based practices. So, Wendy, I've seen you around academic Twitter, but we've never officially met. So it's really lovely to e-meet you, I guess.
Yes.
But it's just so relatable. And I think bringing up this intersection between minorities and mental ill health is quite a great introduction to the next session, where there will be a panel talking about, how a variety of different circumstances have impacted mental health. I think that point at the end there about elite training, that's something that I definitely always kind of think about. These people that are, high level sports people, they have a whole team of people around them to support them at, physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, financial levels. And as academics, we're on a very similar level to elite athletes, just in a different plane. And we don't really have any of that support kind of built in or encouraged. So I love that comparison there. And yeah, talking definitely does help. I guess for anyone that's, again, come in sort of during the session, I acknowledge that I do mental health advocacy as a PhD student because of personal experience with mental illness that's impacted my PhD. And, I can't believe that I'm saying that on an international forum, and we'll be talking about it in the next panel, because there was so much shame associated with that. It was really difficult to admit that I was struggling and that I needed help. But now, a few years, after having opened up and having sought some treatment for myself, I've now actually had so many opportunities as a result of this. And I'm in a place where, I feel like I'm reasonably well now. And I just think it's crazy that talking about this thing that has impacted me, and I know impacts so many academics, has actually been a really positive thing for me, and has given me opportunities to give talks and be a podcast host and talk to academics all around the world about, these different circumstances that they have to deal with day to day. And so I know it's incredibly difficult to open up, but I'm on the other side of it if you are currently struggling. And I know people always say it does get better, but it really does. And I think the fact that Dragonfly and some of our other supporters, Voices of Academia, Cactus Global Initiative, all of the partners of this conference today are starting to drive more of a community around this within academia and try to help reduce that stigma and help us, develop a more supportive community. So I think this is just the start. I know we have a way to go, but I'm so thrilled that, this kind of conference exists and that we have a number of people in this space that are trying to move this along. So Wendy, we do have a few questions that have kind of popped up into the chat. So the first one was around avoidance behaviours. And so avoidance behaviours like avoiding academic work, for example, is something that this person has struggled with. And they were wondering, how parallel would you consider symptoms, causes, and help of substance use disorders to behaviour addictions, such as escapism through social media?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And just yesterday, I was delivering another talk where someone asked about another kind of behavioral addiction. And what we know for the literature is, and from the scientific research studies that have been done, is that substance addictions, gambling, sexual behavior, risk-taking behaviors, various avoidance behaviors like playing games, all of these things can become addictions, and they are related in some way, and they often are some form of checking out, and just sitting in front of a TV for hours and hours and hours can be that as well. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be an active pursuit. It can be an inactive a way to cope, same like using a substance as a coping mechanism. And the best thing to do is to engage with folks around you that you know and you trust, possibly reach out to a healthcare professional. It can be just your general practitioner to start, but start describing your symptoms, describing what's going on with you, talking about it to someone who can help you then tease apart, where am I on that mental health spectrum? Is this just burnout? Which does not meet criteria for a disease. Burnout is something that if it seems to meet the criteria for burnout and not depression, then the solutions are there. Take a break, completely disengage. This is one of the things that's really fascinating because the research for burnout has been really led by the medical field. And so what really has revolutionized and reduced the amount of cynicism and burnout and mistakes, lack of concentration is one of the symptoms of burnout. Medical mistakes drop when people who are burnt out and meet those criteria for burnout, when they get that identified earlier and then engage in one of these coping strategies of building better relationships at work, having more control over their schedule, or taking breaks, a solid 100% unplugged, not doing any form of work breaks, people come back refreshed, totally operating on the highest level again. And so this is something that's really fascinating and loops back to one of the things that we were talking about earlier with the comparing to athletes. We now have a volunteer at Dragonfly who is a former Olympic judo athlete, and she and I were chatting and we were talking about this comparison, and she was like, well, even more so than like an injury and getting addressing that courtside, the thing that's most striking to her as an athlete is the fact that there's no recovery built in to what we do. And so it's just going full blitz all the time, constantly, never letting up. And then as soon as you get that paper in or submit your dissertation or get those reviews back or submit that grant, it is no celebration, no recovery time. You are immediately on to the next thing on that super long to-do list, right? And so there's no recovery built into our system, and that doesn't make sense. Sure, the brain isn't a muscle, but it's an organ like any other organ we have, and it can be exhausted. And so just because you have this high capacity, high ability, and got into your PhD programs or master's programs or became a faculty member or doing a postdoc, just because you have that high capacity, we're our system is set up in a way that was not logical. And so action is my coping mechanism. And so that's why we're trying to flip that on its head and try something different. So if you notice in yourself or in others that you are engaging in things that you recognize as avoidance behaviors, or maybe even edging on addiction, the right thing to do is say, oh, that may be an addiction, that may be avoidance. What am I avoiding? Can I just take a break and that will alleviate it? If not, I should probably talk to somebody who can help me really nail down what's going on with me in order to, again, operate at my highest capacity.
Thanks, Wendy. And so I will just mention we have another 11 minutes in the session. So I might ask one more question on behalf of the chat. And then after the answer to that, I'll get IT to stop recording so that anyone that would like to ask an anonymous question that's unrecorded has the opportunity to do that. So Wendy, you kind of touched on it just then when you sort of talked about this culture in academia of just kind of keeping on going. But Ala was wondering, why do you think we have that culture in academia if we don't feel mentally well? Is there anything that you wanted to add on that aside from what you've just touched on?
The thing that I'll add to that is that it's fascinating when I'm in these conversations with maybe we'll call them the old guard in academia, the folks that have been around a while and might express frustration or bafflement at how sensitive people are these days and stuff like that. And, I'll turn it back on them and I'll ask them, do they know anyone who's died by suicide? Do they know anyone who has struggled severely? Have they ever had struggles and issues? And then almost invariably, they say yes to at least one of those things, often all of them. And then when we get to talking about it, they realize that they haven't, and they figure it out themselves as I'm asking questions. I'm not feeding it to them. It dawns on them that they didn't have permission to talk about these things. They were ridiculed severely in order to push through and bury it down. And the people who make it without complaining are the ones who got rewarded. And that is the system that they were brought up in. And then, I beg the question, why does it need to be that way for everyone to do their best work? And again, invariably, the answer is no. Their best work is done when they've just come back from a vacation, or they have their best ideas going to a conference and really kicking back and enjoying and having fascinating conversations randomly with different new people, learning new material. And this used to be what academia was more like, and now it's transformed into this rat race where we are on a treadmill and no one will let us off. And so we need to work together in order to identify why we do have this culture of overwork. Why is it glorified that I got 2 hours of sleep last night and submitted a 25-page grant and have answered 700 emails in my inbox yesterday? Like that's ridiculous. Those are not how the measure of brilliant work and science and research should be measured. So it's a great question, and I think that it's a good one to investigate in as many conversations as you can engage with your community, the professors you work with, the mentors that you engage with, and to pick that apart, because it doesn't hold water. It really doesn't. It doesn't make sense when we really evaluate it.
Yeah, and I can absolutely, and I'm sure most of us, that are attending today can relate to trying to talk about some of this with, I guess, not always just more senior people in academia, but just some others in academia that just won't, it's difficult for them to talk about and they refuse to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I totally agree with doing the best work, when you've come back from a break, but also when you're able to talk about the emotional side of things. That's something I find, we don't often get that human side in academia, at least for me, in the environment that I'm in. And I feel like if you can even acknowledge how difficult it is together, that actually kind of puts you on the step to being able to better manage it, because then at least it's kind of a shared struggle, and you can kind of, share strategies on how you might get through that, or even just kind of take a little bit of a load off yourself by sharing that.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I will get Alison to stop the recording now.
So thank you so much for a great talk and rich discussion and all the great advice that you gave us, Wendy. If you have any concluding remarks, you're welcome to say.
The last thing I would say is, really just seek that which gives you energy and pleasure. I'm gonna head out for the night. I'm in California, so I'm gonna go see my absolute favorite singer-songwriter, Josh Ritter, and wish you very well for the rest of the conference in this time block. And we'll see some of you maybe at one of the later time blocks. So thank you all so much. And if you're interested, please come to Dragonfly, mentalhealth.org. Get on our newsletter and join us for cafes, or join us as a volunteer. We'd love to get to know you.
Thank you so much. So the workshop is over and we see you in the panel session. Thank you, everyone.